Recently, I completed an extensive analysis of every statement Varys makes in A Song of Ice and Fire, leading to 3 core conclusions. Varys is secretly collaborating with Littlefinger. His ultimate goal is not peace, and he uses magic. My research showed that Varys lies 90% of the time, even to supposed allies like Illyrio, regardless of the perceived privacy or his audience. The discussion that followed revealed several key points of contention, prompting this follow-up. In this video, I'll buttress my original research by revisiting and refining the most critical evidence, ultimately concluding that Varys is not young Griff's ally. Given the focus on their collaboration, I've coined the Bailey's conspiracy as a shorthand. This term specifically denotes the branch of my research where Varys and Littlefinger are working together. I experimented with other combinations, but Bailey's flows better and has more sponsorship potential. This essay will address the most substantive criticisms of my research. While an initial draft included a defense related to Joffrey's wedding, which inadvertently engaged with an older theory from Preston Jacobs, I've removed that section entirely to avoid distraction and any sense of an ambush on him. I will instead be treating that subject in a separate video. So today's focus remains on the foundational pillars of my argument. I will re-examine Littlefinger's role and the logic behind the dagger scheme, touch on some epistemological approaches, reanalyze the critical Illyrio conversation in Arya 3 of Game of Thrones, address the major counterpoints to the Bailey's conspiracy thesis, including the Jaqen Hghar problem, and present a more fleshed out argument for why Varys is not fAegon's ally. To better organize my responses, I've had to distill the main objections into 3 broad categories: the rivalry and agency argument, the long-term peace argument, and the interpretive flaw argument. The rivalry and agency argument adheres to the traditional view that Varys and Littlefinger are rivals, and to the assertion that pivotal events are driven by Littlefinger's independent agency, not by Varys. The long-term peace argument proposes that Varys' actions, however disruptive, are ultimately in service of securing a long-term stable peace enabled by fAegon's ascension. And the interpretive flaw argument critiques that my interpretation of key evidence, specifically the phrase "this hand is not the other," was insufficiently explored, thereby invalidating my logical reasoning because I failed to eliminate all possible alternative readings of that scene. 2 of the most common objections to my theory are deeply connected. First, that Littlefinger and Varys are rivals. Second, that Littlefinger is the primary architect of the chaos, the master manipulator, while Varys is reactive, unaware, or powerless. My argument that they're co-conspirators, with Varys as the senior partner, is not made lightly. The bulk of my analysis is dedicated to demonstrating why the rival theory is unsupported by the text. The traditional view relies on far more supposition than the Bailey's conspiracy and lacks hard evidence. The notion of Littlefinger as the main mover, with Varys as a secondary or passive figure, is a narrative construct made by the TV show. The textual evidence in A Song of Ice and Fire does not support this dynamic. Frequently, there is less proof for Littlefinger's involvement in key events than for Varys's. The show invented a background rivalry and inflated Littlefinger's agency for dramatic tension. In the books, that dynamic does not hold up under scrutiny. To cite events like Jon Arryn's death or the incident with Jaime at Chataya as self-evident proof of Littlefinger's responsibility is to disregard the detailed case I laid out for Varys' orchestration and their direct collaboration. A meaningful rebuttal must engage with that evidence directly. People are doing narrative backflips to fit what the show told us, but I have to say it clearly. The show is not the books. One commenter asserted that my entire argument is invalid because George Martin confirmed that Varys and Littlefinger are adversarial. This references a 2016 appearance in Guadalajara, where a fan asked Martin to describe the relationship between Varys and Littlefinger. George says, "Adversarial. Both of them know a lot about the other, including some very damaging things. They're essentially in a stalemate because they know that if one reveals what they know about the other would reciprocate, and then they could both be destroyed. I think Littlefinger has a better idea of what Varys wants than Varys has an idea of what Littlefinger wants. Littlefinger is an agent of chaos who likes to be unpredictable, and succeeds in that. At first glance, this seems definitive. However, this criticism imports an unexamined assumption that Martin is telling the truth. He has a documented history of being unreliable, both in forecasts, like the repeated unfulfilled predictions for the Winds of Winter, and in statements about the text itself. For example, in February 2016, he promised not to write anything else until The Winds of Winter was finished, while actively writing Fire and Blood, which released in 2018, lying straight to our faces about what he was actually doing. Not everything Martin says is true. Crucially, within the same interview, Martin demonstrates this unreliability regarding canonical details. When asked if Robert Baratheon ever suspected his children were not his own, at 1637 he answers no. Robert was not a real intellectual giant. He had many grievances against Cersei, but that never would have dawned on him, and if he had known, he would have killed everybody, and he never would have dreamed that anyone would be stupid enough to risk his wrath. And his wrath could be considerable. Then Martin looks at his feet like Bran does when he lies, and adjusts his hat to cover his eyes. This is a simplification that contradicts the nuance in his written text. In A Game of Thrones, Robert is portrayed as willfully blind. Littlefinger comments that he is, quote, practiced at closing his eyes to things he would rather not see. For example, his rapidly accumulating debts, the injustice at Derry, or Gregor's attempted murder of Loras Tyrell at the Hand's Tourney. In A Feast for Crows, Jaime Lannister recalls how, on the road at Derry, he stepped over Robert to have sex with Cersei on the king's bed right beside him. Jaime contemplates how there was simply no way that Robert didn't know. Martin's simplified "no, he would have killed everyone" erases this established character trait. Later, in the same interview at 55:01, when asked about Lyanna Stark's words at the Tower of Joy, he explicitly deflects. Quote, have to keep reading the books. I'm not going to give that away on a stage in Guadalajara. This reveals his standard approach of evasion or oversimplification to protect narrative secrets. Therefore, the adversarial comment cannot be held as a definitive trump card over textual analysis. It exists within a context of proven misinformation. To treat it as absolute canon ignores both the author's own behavior and, more importantly, the words on the page. This is why at the beginning of the video I said very clearly that I would only be accepting the words on the page and the published text as evidence for anything. This leads to a foundational principle of modern literary analysis, the death of the author. As coined by French literary theorist Roland Barthes, the death of the author means that once a work is published, it separates from its creator. The author's stated intent becomes just one interpretation among many, not the final authority. The text itself is sovereign. For literary analysis, the primary evidence must be the published work, its language, patterns, and internal logic. An author's external statement can provide context, but it cannot invalidate a reading substantiated by the text itself. The ultimate authority on A Song of Ice and Fire is A Song of Ice and Fire, not a comment made on a stage. A more sophisticated critique of the Bailey's conspiracy accepts the possibility of partnership, but questions Varys' underlying motive. For Littlefinger, the incentives are clearer: wealth, power, and social advancement. There is circumstantial evidence that Varys may have promised Catelyn Stark, later substituted with Sansa, as a reward, which could have been Baelish's express price for collaboration. Varys' ultimate motives remain, by design, mysterious. In my original analysis, I therefore focused on building a case from textual evidence, actions, patterns, and verifiable connections. While it is compelling to speculate that Varys might have been acting in service of a Targaryen restoration tied to the prophecy, or to bring about the Long Night, this remains speculation, not established fact. We must distinguish between plausible conjecture and evidence-based argument. My research is built on the latter, inviting engagement with the text itself, not with over-reliance on supposition or unreliable external statements. This distinction between what is compelling speculation and what is textually demonstrable forces us to confront a foundational question. How do we know what we claim to know about this story? We've reached a critical juncture of epistemology, the study of knowing things. In the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, and in our analysis of it, we must rigorously define our sources of knowledge and their validity. The rival theory concerning Varys and Littlefinger frequently relies on a metatextual premise, the dramatic adversarial dynamic popularized by the show, and then attempts to retrofit the textual evidence to support that theory. This leads to what I call narrative backflips, emphasizing minor ambiguous interactions while ignoring or explaining away the deeper patterns of parallel action and the shared outcome that suggest collaboration. Which framework accounts for more textual evidence with fewer unsupported assumptions? Which theory remains consistent across multiple books? The adversarial model requires us to believe in a series of staggering coincidences where two master schemers working at cross purposes consistently create outcomes that advance a singular destabilizing end? The conspiratorial model sees that confluence of outcomes as design. To dismiss this without engaging the evidence is to prioritize a preconceived narrative over textual analysis. It is to commit what we call begging the question, or circular reasoning, where the answer is assumed and the facts are forced to conform to it. True knowledge is won by questioning comfortable assumptions and following the evidence, no matter how deeply it leads down the rabbit hole. The relentless theorizing within our fandom has led to a state of epistemological confusion. In the absence of new content, the community's standards for what constitutes a sound argument have eroded, allowing nearly any conjecture to be presented as plausible. This environment has led to a dangerous secondary effect. Verifiable facts are often downgraded to the status of mere theories, creating a false equivalence between demonstrable truth and speculation. To counter this trend, we must return to basic principles of logic and clearly distinguish between sound deduction and baseless speculation. The foundation of this distinction is deductive reasoning, formalized over 2,000 years ago by the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. In his book called Organon, he established the syllogism as a truth-preserving form of argument. A syllogism takes two premises accepted or known to be true and combines them to draw an inevitable inference. For example, all humans are mortal. John Greenwood is a human. Therefore, John Greenwood is mortal. If both premises are true, the conclusion is inescapable. Such a conclusion can then serve as a premise for further deduction, building a chain of verifiable knowledge. This form of reasoning is admissible in a court of law, even to convict someone of murder. Please be serious. I am not going to argue the validity of logical reasoning in a YouTube comment section. Anyways, to evaluate deductive reasoning, we assess two criteria: validity and soundness. Validity refers to internal coherence. If we accept the premises, does the conclusion logically follow? One way to test this is reductio ad absurdum. If accepting the premises while rejecting the conclusion leads to a contradiction or an impossibility, then the argument is valid. Soundness, on the other hand, requires both validity and factual truth in all of the premises. An argument is sound only if it is logically valid and built on true premises. To challenge a deductive argument within the fandom, we must attack either validity or soundness. We must expose a flaw in its logical structure, which is validity, or we must disprove one of its foundational premises, which is soundness. An argument that is both logically valid and built on confirmed canonical premises yields a conclusion that is more than mere speculation or theory. It is a verifiable fact derived through logical reasoning. By reinstating these standards, we can begin to separate speculation from the legitimate discoverable truth that has been there all along. In the zero-sum political landscape of King's Landing, a rational actor seeks to gain and maintain unique advantages over rivals. Exclusive control of a valuable secret is a unique advantage. Voluntarily sharing that information with a competitor is inherently irrational, as it diminishes your influence while strengthening your opponents. A rational player would only disclose critical intelligence if doing so yielded a greater strategic benefit than keeping it secret. Varys, upon discovering Catelyn Stark's secret arrival to the capital, possessed an exclusive, high-value secret. A genuine rival to Littlefinger would have exploited this information independently to manipulate Catelyn, undermine Eddard Stark, or expose Littlefinger's own schemes. Instead, Varys immediately informed Littlefinger and orchestrated a secret meeting between the three of them. This provides no strategic benefit to Varys, unless he and Littlefinger were already cooperating towards a shared objective. Thus, the first logical pillar. Varys' voluntary disclosure is inconsistent with genuine rivalry. This is not passive observation, it's active facilitation. Varys' role in creating this opportunity for Littlefinger fundamentally contradicts the premise of an adversarial relationship. Moreover, the conversation itself serves as evidence of their coordination in setting the war in motion. During the meeting with Catelyn, Littlefinger recounts a verifiably false story. He claims to have lost the Valyrian steel dagger to Tyrion Lannister in a wager. Varys, the Master of Whisperers, who would be intimately familiar with the bending tendencies of the royal family, listens without objection. He offers no correction, no expression of doubt, nothing. And so through logical reasoning, I'm about to prove that they're working together through a series of syllogisms. A person who knows statement X is false, yet remains silent, allows it to be accepted as truth. Allowing a false statement to be accepted as truth constitutes passive endorsement. Therefore, someone who listens to statement X and remains silent, despite knowing it is false, passively endorses it. Varys, who possesses detailed knowledge of royal betting habits, hears Littlefinger's verifiably false claim that he lost the Valyrian steel dagger to Tyrion in a bet. Varys remains silent, while Littlefinger tells this lie to Catelyn Stark. As established in Syllogism 1, silence in the face of a known falsehood constitutes passive endorsement. Therefore, Varys passively endorses Littlefinger's lie. But Varys goes beyond passive endorsement. He actively plays dumb, making Littlefinger's lie more credible to Catelyn. Varys' theatrics, remember he's a mummer, transforms passive endorsement into complicitness. A genuine rival, recognizing that the lie serves only Littlefinger's goal of sowing discord between the Starks and Lannisters, would have a compelling incentive to expose it or at least distance himself. Varys does neither, because his interests align with Littlefinger's in catalyzing the War of the Five Kings, a contradiction to the objectives that Varys later professes to Illyrio. We can establish that Varys wants the lie to happen through another round of deductive reasoning. A person who knows that a statement is false will typically correct it or distance themselves unless they have a stake in the liar's success, fear severe consequences, or are involved in the deception. Littlefinger's claim is false. Varys knows that it's false. Varys endorses the false statement, and there's no evidence suggesting that Varys feared consequences from Littlefinger for correcting him here, and such a fear is implausible given Varys' abilities. Therefore, Varys has a stake in Littlefinger's success or is involved in the deception. The collaboration between Varys and Littlefinger is not an end in itself. Their shared actions, the lie and its endorsement, were a means to a larger strategic goal. The logical endpoint of this scheme can be deduced through a chain of political inevitability. The lie guarantees a public dispute. If Tyrion is implicated, the Starks, bound by honor and love, will seek justice and will not let the issue go. As Hand of the King in Robert's absence, Ned Stark is legally entitled to and morally compelled by duty and honor to pursue justice himself. The proud Lannisters will never admit guilt or submit to punishment, especially for something that they didn't do. Therefore, revealing the dagger as Tyrion's will cause an immediate and public dispute between Stark and Lannister. A public dispute over this matter will occur if the dagger is revealed as Tyrion's, as established in Syllogism 4. The honorable Starks will never drop the matter. The proud Lannisters will never admit guilt or submit to punishment, especially to something that they didn't do. The king, who neglects his duties to justice, will not adjudicate, as established by the Dairy incident. Therefore, with irreconcilable positions and no functional sovereign to settle it, the dispute cannot be resolved peacefully. Therefore, the dispute will escalate to open war. Littlefinger and Varys are master strategists with an expert understanding of the personalities involved. They know, or ought to know, that a false accusation of this magnitude will create a grievance, force a public dispute, and, in the absence of royal intervention, lead to war. Therefore, by orchestrating and endorsing the lie, they acted with the foreknowledge that it would cause a war between Stark and Lannister. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that Varys and Littlefinger are true rivals for a moment. This premise leads to an absurd and contradictory portrait of Varys. True rivals are rational, self-interested actors who do not repeatedly and voluntarily engage in complex, coordinated behaviors that solely and significantly advantage their competitor. Varys shares exclusive intelligence with Littlefinger, arranges his secret meeting with Catelyn, endorses his lie with silence, and actively performs theatrics to bolster its credibility, all while knowing that this lie will cause a war between the Starks and Lannisters. Therefore, Varys is a shrewd, self-interested player who inexplicably acts as an altruistic benefactor to his arch-rival, advancing Littlefinger's position at great cost to his own, with no compensating gain. As you can see, this conclusion is logically absurd. Varys cannot both be a master strategist and a self-sabotaging fool. With a reductio ad absurdum, we can see that the rivalry premise is false. The only logical conclusion is conspiracy. Varys and Littlefinger are rational, self-interested actors. Rational rivals do not repeatedly and voluntarily coordinate to solely and significantly advantage their competitor without coercion or compensating gain. Varys holds an exclusive advantage over Littlefinger by knowing about Catelyn's arrival and the purpose of her visit. Varys voluntarily shares his exclusive high-value intelligence with Littlefinger immediately upon learning it. Varys arranges for Littlefinger to meet with Catelyn Stark in secret and to tell her the Dagger Lie. Varys silently endorses and actively supports Littlefinger's lie with theatrics, granting Littlefinger control over the beliefs of the Hand's wife, influencing her to believe the Dagger Lie and to internalize it as a true fact. Littlefinger and Varys know that this false statement will create a war between Stark and Lannister. Therefore, Varys and Littlefinger are collaborators, seeking to start a war. Varys' actions are consistent if, and only if, he and Littlefinger were collaborators from the start. The dagger scheme was a coordinated first strike. By the time Catelyn Stark arrived in King's Landing, Varys was not a passive observer or a conflicted peacemaker. He was an active agent of chaos, working with Littlefinger to trigger the war that would consume Westeros. The logical conclusion of the Baeley's conspiracy creates a contradiction with Varys' secret conversation with Illyrio Mopatis in the cellars of the Red Keep dungeons in Arya 3 Game of Thrones. In that scene, Varys and Illyrio outline a long-term strategy. Illyrio expresses frustration that their pieces are not yet in place, and explicitly advocates for delaying the war. Varys complains that the war is coming whether they want it or not, and Illyrio urges patience and delay. Our analysis of the dagger scheme reveals this to be a mummer's farce. Varys is simultaneously actively collaborating with Littlefinger to ignite the Stark-Lannister war immediately, and secretly telling Illyrio that the war must be delayed until fAegon is ready. This is an irreconcilable paradox. Varys cannot be both an unwilling bystander fearing a premature war and its primary architect. Varys is lying to Illyrio, both on this critical part of their conversation as well as several details that I covered in the original essay. He's feigning ignorance of Littlefinger's plans and pretending to want delay, all while his actions are deliberately accelerating the timeline. He is knowingly triggering the very war that he claims to want postponed. If Varys is working to start a war in a Game of Thrones, then he was necessarily working against the Illyrio-fAegon timeline. This suggests several things. fAegon may just be another piece in Varys' scheme, not the destined king that Illyrio believes he's grooming. Also, that Varys' true endgame does not align with Illyrio's true endgame. And furthermore, that Varys sought out the War of the Five Kings for his own different version of the realm's future, a vision that he has kept hidden even from Illyrio. This forces a seismic reevaluation. Varys has a plan that diverges from or supersedes the one he shares with Illyrio. It is the only explanation that reconciles all of the evidence presented. I'll now move on to the interpretive flaw argument. The secret meeting between Varys and Illyrio Mopatis, overheard by Arya Stark in the cellars of the Red Keep, is often presented as the foundational evidence for Varys being a proponent of the fAegon conspiracy. On the surface, it depicts two partners in a long-term plot expressing alarm that events are moving too quickly for their planned invasion. From this, many readers conclude that Varys wants to delay war until his candidate is ready, which puts him at odds with Littlefinger, who wants a war immediately so that he can rise in the chaos. This, they argue, proves that Varys and Littlefinger are independent and opposing players in the game. However, a closer examination reveals that this scene does not disprove a deeper Bailey's conspiracy. Instead, it unveils a critical strategic divergence between Varys and his Pentoshi ally. So, in Arya 3 of Game of Thrones, Arya sneaks into the cellars of the Red Keep and stumbles onto Varys in his Rugen outfit speaking with Illyrio Mopatis. The eavesdropping begins with Arya hearing Varys say that Ned found one of Robert's bastards, and the rest will come soon. A day, 2 days, a fortnight. He warns that the Lannisters tried to kill Bran, but made a mess of it, and that Ned won't let that go. I warn you, the wolf and the lion will soon be at each other's throats, whether we will it or no. Too soon, too soon. What good is war now? We are not ready. Delay. As well bid me stop time. Do you take me for a wizard? No less. What would you have me do? If one hand can die, why not a second? You have danced the dance before, my friend. Before is not now, and this hand is not the other. Perhaps so. None the less, we must have time. The princess is with child. The cow will not bestir himself until his son is born. You know how they are, these savages. If he does not bestir himself soon, it may be too late. This is no longer a game for two players, if it ever was. He then proceeds to say how Stannis and Lysa have fled beyond Varys' reach and are amassing troops. Renly plots to replace Cersei as queen with Margaery Tyrell, and Varys claims to have no idea what Littlefinger is up to. Yet Lord Stark's the one who troubles my sleep. He has the bastard, he has the book, and soon enough he'll have the truth. And now his wife has abducted Tyrion Lannister, thanks to Littlefinger's meddling. Delay, you say? Make haste, I reply. Even the finest of jugglers cannot keep 100 balls in the air forever. You are more than a juggler, old friend. You are a true sorcerer. All I ask is that you work your magic a while longer. Illyrio's position in the conversation is clear and consistent. He advocates for delay. His complaints are rooted in the practical timelines of their ostensible plan, which I'll call Plan A. Daenerys is pregnant. Khal Drogo will not bestir himself until his son is born. They need at least a few months for the Dothraki to become a usable asset, because they have to wait for Daenerys' child to be born. Taking into account travel time and other imperfections, it seems like at least another year is needed. Young Griff needs time as well. Their candidate isn't done in the oven and needs further time to become the perfect king. For Illyrio's plan to put Aegon on the throne, the war is intended to be a controlled surgical strike that's perfectly timed to the readiness of their invasion force and their candidate. To achieve this delay, he proposes to assassinate the new Hand of the King. If one hand can die, why not a second? You've danced the dance before, my friend. This line is pivotal. Illyrio is not suggesting a novel idea when he says, you've danced the dance before, my friend. He's pointing to a past success as their model for the present dilemma. Within the context of their secret meeting, he is revealing that Varys was instrumental in removing a previous hand to manage the political timeline. Illyrio's plan is simple. Replicate that success to bide the time their schedule demands. Within the context of this secret meeting, Illyrio is revealing that Varys was a key architect in the plot to kill Jon Arryn. Further to that, Illyrio is asking Varys to delay war by killing Ned. We, as the reader, know that Illyrio's plan is to wait until fAegon is old enough and ready to rule before priming Westeros for his ascent by weakening it through war and chaos. The current events are roughly going to plan, but they're happening too soon, so Illyrio wants Varys to help delay the war. Illyrio's entire purpose in this meeting is to delay the outbreak of war. His proposed solution is to kill the current hand, Ned Stark, to recreate a specific political condition that previously caused delay. The counterpoint posits that Illyrio is saying, we delayed a war by getting rid of a hand, and we can do it again. Not necessarily that they killed a hand, and not necessarily that it's Jon Arryn that he's referring to. The core counter-argument posits that the other hand could be anyone from Varys' long tenure, notably Jon Connington, whose death was faked. To assess this, we must apply a logical test. Which previous hand's removal, during Varys' service, actually delayed a major war or stabilized the realm in a way that benefited Aegon's timeline? Let's go through the hands one by one. Tywin Lannister resigned when Jaime was appointed to the Kingsguard. If Varys had a hand in it, he all but guaranteed war with this move. Removing the realm's most competent administrator left Aerys unchecked and left Robert's rebellion unchecked. Far from buying time, it actually hastened war and chaos. So this achieved the opposite to what Illyrio is asking for, and at that point Griff was a baby, not exactly poised to invade. Owen Merryweather's removal is distant history with no established causal link to preventing an imminent conflict. Varys didn't fake his death or cause him to be removed from office. He was the scapegoat for the defeat at Summerhall. His removal had basically nothing to do with Varys. His removal also didn't prevent or stop a war, or cause the kind of delay that Illyrio is asking for. His sacking didn't change anything, and again, Griff was in swaddling clothes. Jon Connington's disappearance occurred over 15 years ago during Robert's Rebellion. War had already broken out. His fake death did nothing to change the status of the war. It was not a relevant precedent for causing delay, as Illyrio suggests, and it didn't prevent the outbreak of a war. It had no effect at all on the timing of Illyrio's war. Furthermore, Griff was still a baby, completely unready to invade and take the throne. Aerys tried to reappoint Tywin Lannister as hand, but Varys intercepted the letter, and it never arrived to Casterly Rock, as confirmed by Jaime's testimony in Jaime 5 A Storm of Swords and Kevan Lannister in the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons. Denying Tywin his reappointment accelerated the war and the downfall of the Targaryens. Once more, competent Tywin Lannister being in charge would have made things look very different, and Griff was, notably, still a baby. Carlton Chelstead was appointed as Connington's replacement after Stony Sept. Tywin's apparent refusal to return his hand caused the king to be paranoid and start building caches of wildfire everywhere. As testified by Jaime, Chelstead discovered this independently, due to the frequent secret meetings with the pyromancers and the strange movements and activities of the pyromancers in King's Landing. Chelstead confronted Aerys, refused to take part in the wildfire scheme, and was burned alive for it. There is no evidence that Varys was involved in Chelstead's death. Chelstead died because he objected to wildfire, not because he was poised to start a war. His death didn't stall anything. The rebels were already rebelling. Stony Sept was already lost. The war accelerated further, along with the wildfire plot. And, once again, Griff was still too young. Next we turn to Lord Rosart, the chief pyromancer whose hand after Chelstead was burned alive. Now, to be internally consistent with my own theories, Varys, in a roundabout kind of way, killed Rosart by manipulating Jaime into killing him, but it still makes no sense to refer to, as Ned's situation is completely different. And once again, Rosart's death did nothing to delay a war. And guess what I'm going to say?
Check out the big brain on Brad. You're a smart motherfucker, that's right.
Young Griff was still too young to take the throne. Every option predating Jon Arryn fails the test. Their removals either hastened conflict, occurred amidst ongoing war, or happened when fAegon was too young for an invasion to be on the table. They're not logical precedents for delaying a war to wait for their candidate's readiness. Only Jon Arryn fits perfectly. In terms of delay, his sudden death did delay a war. It halted an investigation into the royal lineage, preserving the status quo and allowing Illyrio's plans to continue undisturbed. In terms of peace, there was no ongoing war, hence Arryn's death prevented a war. And fAegon is now old enough to be a plausible contender. Delay directly serves his maturity. And he died mere weeks before this conversation, when they're starting to move the pieces into place for the endgame of Plan A. A final counter-argument suggests that Illyrio might be proposing to fake Ned's death to recruit him for the Targaryen cause. This collapses under even minimal scrutiny. How would spiriting Ned away delay the war that his arrest of Tyrion had just triggered? If Ned disappears, the world believes him to be dead. The result, the North accusing the Lannisters and mobilizing, is identical to his actual death. And the idea that Illyrio would invite the famously honorable, ostensibly anti-Targaryen, and vengeful Ned Stark into the most delicate secret in the world, and to let Ned Stark within sword reach of his son, is absurd. The conclusion is inescapable. When Illyrio says, "You have danced the dance before," he is referring specifically to the murder of Jon Arryn. This is not speculation. It is the only option that satisfies the purpose of the conversation and the evidence at hand. It is the only option that holds up to logical examination and scrutiny, let alone all of the supporting evidence provided in the essay, such as Varys knowing that the tears of Lee were used despite the tears of Lee never leaving a trace. Therefore, within the context of their secret meeting, Illyrio is revealing a hidden truth about the story. Varys orchestrated the death of Jon Arryn. This is where the deduction becomes more complex, as it requires reconciling Illyrio's statement with the known fact that Littlefinger and Lysa were the direct perpetrators. If Littlefinger gave the order and Lysa carried it out, why would Illyrio say that Varys killed him? There's a few possibilities which we must examine. First, Illyrio might be mistaken. It's possible that Illyrio knows Jon Arryn died and just assumes that Varys did it. Second, Varys may have told Illyrio that he was responsible despite not being responsible. Third, Varys was indeed the one behind the scheme, and Littlefinger is his pawn or co-conspirator. And fourth, that Illyrio is referring to another hand. We have already eliminated the possibility that he's speaking about another hand in the preceding analysis, which leaves three more options. We know that Illyrio wasn't mistaken because Varys takes responsibility for the murder in this very conversation when he says, "Before is not now, and this hand is not the other." In response to Illyrio's question of, "Why don't you just kill the new hand like you did with Jon Arryn?" Varys responds by saying, "Well, things are different now." He doesn't correct Illyrio, saying that Littlefinger did it, or even just that Varys didn't do it. He takes responsibility by implication when he says that things are different. If we assume that Illyrio is acting on an assumption, then Varys doing nothing to correct that assumption and implying that it's correct is the same thing as telling Illyrio that the assumption is correct, and that Varys did it. If Varys didn't tell this to Illyrio before, which is unlikely, then we're seeing the conversation where Varys is telling Illyrio that he's behind it. Therefore, we know for certain that Varys told Illyrio that he was responsible for Jon Arryn's death, because he's telling him now. The question is now whether he is lying to Illyrio that he killed someone he didn't, possibility A, or whether he was genuinely responsible for Jon Arryn's death, possibility B. Possibility A. Varys is lying to Illyrio. This scenario posits that Varys is claiming responsibility for a crime he didn't commit. What motivation would Varys have to lie about being responsible for Jon Arryn's death? It doesn't make any sense. The only plausible motives here are that Varys wants to maintain the illusion of control over a rapidly deteriorating plan. Varys' power is that he knows everything. Admitting that Littlefinger orchestrated Jon Arryn's death without his involvement or foreknowledge would make him look weak to Illyrio and undermine his persona. This is an extremely flimsy explanation, and based on everything we can observe about Varys, it's false. The Cat's Paw in Winterfell throws a massive wrench in their conspiracy, because it brings the Starks and Lannisters into conflict too early. Varys doesn't take responsibility for the Cat's Paw. He blames the Lannisters. So there's already no illusion of control to maintain, and he further downplays his own capabilities by saying he can't kill Ned Stark because things are different, which is such a pitiful excuse when we, the readers, know what Varys is capable of. It's such an obvious lie. There's nothing stopping Varys from walking into the Hand's Tower in the middle of the night and slitting Ned's throat. Varys basically kills Tywin with a crossbow in a storm of swords, smashes Pycelle's head in during A Dance with Dragons, and shoots Kevan Lannister himself with a crossbow in A Dance with Dragons. So we can see that even within this conversation, the idea that Varys would be motivated by maintaining his pride or the illusion of control is repudiated by Varys actively going out of his way to make himself appear weaker, and emphasizing the chaos, emphasizing the urgency of the situation, and pressing Illyrio to make haste and accelerate their plan. He is actively presenting himself as less in control, not propping up an illusion of omnipotence. A man trying to look powerful doesn't immediately plead powerlessness. Which brings us to possibility B. Varys was responsible for Jon Arryn's death. This scenario posits that Varys is claiming responsibility for Jon Arryn's death because he planned it, and because he doesn't want Illyrio to know that Littlefinger was involved. His motivation for this would be that Varys and Littlefinger are partners in crime for a scheme that's different than Illyrio's plan to put fAegon on the throne, and are stringing him along for resources, among other reasons that we can't know this early in the plot. We're presented with a contradiction. Varys tells Illyrio that he killed Jon Arryn, but Littlefinger was the one who instructed Lysa. The only logical way to resolve this contradiction is that both are true. Varys and Littlefinger killed Jon Arryn, meaning they were collaborators. It is the only possibility remaining. Therefore, it must be true. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. This is the smoking gun that proves Varys and Littlefinger aren't rivals. They're collaborators. Varys immediately rejects Illyrio's suggestion to kill Ned, and his reasoning further cements Jon Arryn as the other hand. Quote, "Before is not now, and this hand is not the other. Lord Stark's the one who troubles my sleep. He has the bastard, he has the book, and soon enough he'll have the truth." Varys draws an explicit contrast between the two hands. Varys' meaning is crystal clear. I can't kill Ned the way that we killed Jon Arryn. Arryn was old, trusting, and his death could be staged as an accident or a natural death. Ned is young, actively investigating, and has Robert's bastard in Arryn's book. Killing him would be seen as murder and would ignite the North immediately. It might even implicate me. Doing this would be too difficult. The reference to the bastard and the book is another link. These are the bits of evidence uncovered by Jon Arryn's investigation that Ned has inherited. Varys is saying that Ned is continuing the work of the previous hand, the one that they got rid of, i.e. Jon Arryn. John Connington did not possess the bastard and did not possess the book. It could only possibly refer to Jon Arryn. There's further supporting evidence in Varys' two players monologue when he says that Catelyn Stark has abducted Tyrion Lannister thanks to Littlefinger's meddling. But we as the readers already know that Varys was actively part of the deception that caused Catelyn to suspect Tyrion, and that he did nothing to stop it from happening. Both this lie and Varys' actions in Catelyn 4 A Game of Thrones make sense in retrospect when you realize that he's collaborating with Littlefinger. Varys' dialogue paints an opposing vision to Illyrio's. Not once in this entire conversation does he agree that delay is possible or even desirable. While Illyrio pleads for time, Varys urges haste. "Delay, you say. Make haste," I reply. He frames the impending Stark-Lannister war as an inevitability, and catalogues the multiplying threats. Stannis and Lysa gathering forces, Renly plotting with the Tyrells, and most troublingly, Eddard Stark closing in on the truth about Cersei's children. Even the finest of jugglers cannot keep 100 balls in the air forever. This is not the language of a man seeking to postpone a crisis. Varys is trying to make it seem like he is operating on a different plan. Plan B, that shares the same end goal as Plan A, an accelerated timeline where the main objective is to adapt to the chaos and exploit the available opportunity to bring Griff forward now. However, he is in fact operating on Plan C, a different plan with a different end goal. Varys has a deeper, more mysterious endgame, which uses Griff as a piece to get to it, but is not beholden to the same schedule as Illyrio, and does not end with Griff on the throne. The storm arriving early is a feature, not a bug. Aegon's invasion was part of this plan, but it's not the end or the purpose of the plan, which is why to Varys it doesn't matter whether Aegon is ready to rule, or whether the Dothraki will bestir themselves, or whether any of the other time-sensitive elements are in place. Now, supposing you accepted my reasoning as true, there's still a few counterpoints. That Varys doesn't want to kill Ned out of self-preservation and or the interest of peace. That Varys did try to peacefully remove Ned. Problem of internal coherence with my own Chataya section, and what I'll call the Jaqen Hghar problem. In terms of not killing Ned, this counter-argument posits that Varys doesn't want to kill Ned because it could arouse suspicion against Varys himself, or cause a war between Stark and Lannister that he doesn't want. This is a weak excuse. The reader knows that Varys is a master of deception. Could he not frame another person like he did with Sir Hugh, or Joffrey's death, or the Antlermen? Could he not engineer a fit of madness, such as dosing Ned with basilisk's blood before a meeting with Robert, making his death appear a treasonous and spontaneous act? While Catelyn won't believe it, the ambiguity around his death would prevent a clear casus belli and paralyze the North's mobilization, achieving the delay that Illyrio wants for a few months, as the scheme requires. But more importantly, the question is not if Varys could kill Ned, but whether doing so serves his true objective. Varys wants war and tells Illyrio as much in this conversation. Framing Ned's death as a mysterious accident or madness might delay Robb's mobilization, but it does nothing to direct fury specifically at the Lannisters, which is the essential fuel for the war that Varys wants. Varys requires a clear conflict between Stark and Lannister to set off the powder keg. Ned's ambiguous death would muddy those waters and cause another delay. He refuses to kill Ned because it fails to advance his endgame. A more nuanced critique is that Varys did try to have Ned removed by announcing that Daenerys was pregnant, knowing that Ned would resign over his honor. In fact, this was successful. Isn't this Varys performing a delay like Illyrio asked? It's a good argument, but it's flawed. The counterargument correctly notes that Varys' announcement caused Ned to resign. However, labeling this as a delay strategy misreads Varys' true objective in that scene. He wasn't removing Ned to buy time. He was orchestrating the trigger that would launch Khal Drogo's invasion. Varys wants to accelerate the war, and one of the problems with that is accelerating the Dothraki invasion. They won't bestir themselves, as Illyrio says. To make them bestir themselves, Khal Drogo must be somehow convinced to attack Westeros, since he doesn't care about it. In the TV show, this happens during the sequence when Viserys is given his crown of molten gold straight to the face. Khal Drogo is so hyped up by killing Varys and for his queen that he promises to give her everything she ever wanted and to invade Westeros. But this isn't the sequence of events in the books. Khal Drogo kills Viserys with the Golden Crown in Daenerys 5 of Game of Thrones, but in Daenerys 6 of Game of Thrones, he still doesn't care about invading Westeros, because it has no particular value to the Dothraki. It's only after the wine seller tries to poison Daenerys in the Western Market to claim Robert's reward that Khal Drogo swears to cross the Narrow Sea in Daenerys 6 of Game of Thrones. Therefore, Varys used Illyrio's request for Ned's removal to instead manufacture the provocation that would launch the Dothraki invasion on Varys' accelerated timetable. Furthermore, the counterpoint misses the most sophisticated layer of Varys' plan. He's been serving under Robert for 15 years and has a deep understanding of Robert Baratheon's character. Varys knew that Robert would never accept Ned's resignation. Ned was not just a hand. He was Robert's last tether to his honor, his only true friend, and a crutch for a king weary of rule. Even without magic, Varys could foresee the inevitable sequence. Within a few days or weeks, Robert would demand Ned's return. This foresight transforms Ned's resignation from a dismissal into a strategic trap. When Robert inevitably reinstates Ned, it's not as a hand with indisputed moral and political capital. He returned as a supplicant whose protest had been overruled, his authority visibly diminished. His relationship with Robert was now strained by public disagreement and a reluctant recall, making him less able to restrain the king or command the council. This erosion of power was vital to Varys. A strong, confident hand might have stabilized the realm, but a recalled and resentful one would be far more susceptible to the traps being laid, and far more dependent on the assistance of Varys and Littlefinger. When Robert died, Ned's position as Lord Protector and Regent was inherently unstable because his power was seen as a product of Robert's fading whim. His disastrous attempt to seize power later, relying on Littlefinger's gold cloaks, was a direct result of the isolation and compromised authority that Varys had ensured through the resignation and return cycle. Another layer of Varys' acceleration strategy is the masterstroke he executes in the immediate wake of Robert's death. Varys moves from subtle manipulation to almost open sabotage, directly ensuring the swift and violent destabilization that he requires. While Robert lays dying, he dictates a will naming Ned as regent. Possession of this document, legitimate, royal, and sealed, is Ned's single greatest source of political power. For a strategist seeking delay, or stability, or peace and the good of the realm, securing the will's safe passage and empowering Ned would be the logical move. Varys does the exact opposite. He immediately leaks its explosive contents to Peter Baelish, supposedly his greatest rival. Littlefinger's words to Ned are the evidence. Varys hinted as much, and you have just confirmed it. This is a deliberate act of political arson. If, as the delay theory posits, Varys and Littlefinger are rivals working at cross purposes, then arming Littlefinger with the realm's most critical secret is inexplicable. You do not give your most dangerous competitor the keys to the kingdom. Supposing they're rivals, Varys knows Littlefinger's survival depends on ingratiating himself with the winning side. By informing Littlefinger of Ned's letter, Varys guarantees that Littlefinger will race to Cersei to trade intelligence for future favor. This enables Cersei to act preemptively, setting the trap in the throne room. This is not speculation. In Tyrion 1: A Clash of Kings, Cersei confirms that this is exactly what happened. Quote, Littlefinger made the arrangements. We needed Slint's gold cloaks. Eddard Stark was plotting with Renly, and he'd written to Lord Stannis offering him the throne. We might have lost all. Even so, it was a close thing. If Sansa hadn't come to me and told me all her father's plans. In this single brilliant maneuver, Varys transforms Robert's death from a moment of potential orderly transition into a catalyst for immediate war. He accelerates the conflict by ensuring the Lannisters consolidate power unlawfully and violently, giving Stark and Baratheon factions no choice but to respond with force. And, as further evidence of their collaboration, Littlefinger uses the same lie with Cersei that Varys used on Ned and the Black Cells, when he told Cersei that Stark was plotting with Renly. Remember that Varys lies to Ned that Renly and Stannis are working together, and Littlefinger is using that same lie with Cersei. Littlefinger also knew that Stark had written to Stannis, which is something that only Varys could have known at the time. Therefore, Varys' actions surrounding Robert's death are a key piece of overlooked evidence in his accelerationist scheme. They prove conclusively that his goal was not to buy time for a Targaryen restoration years in the future, but to trigger a war right now. I'll now move into two major holes in my theory: internal coherence regarding Chataya's and the Jaqen Hghar problem. We'll start with Chataya's. If Varys tells Illyrio that he won't kill Ned, why do I argue that later he has Ned attacked by Jaime Lannister at Chataya's? If Varys tipped off Catelyn about the dagger via his intermediary Littlefinger, and then alerted Ned to the brothel via his intermediary Littlefinger, and then alerted Jaime to Ned's location at the brothel, then he was clearly engineering a violent confrontation. This suggests that Varys did want Ned dead, lending credence to the idea that the dance Illyrio referred to was about disappearing Ned, not killing him. This counterpoint conflates method with outcome. The confrontation at Chataya's is not an attempt to get Ned killed. Varys' goal was a public violent clash between Stark and Lannister that would make reconciliation impossible. He achieves that with the confrontation. If Ned dies, war erupts instantly. If Ned is wounded or humiliated, as happened in the book, this insult is public and grave, irrevocably cementing hostility. Jaime's flight afterwards is a confession of guilt. This serves the agenda of hastening the war perfectly. It applies immediate pressure to the tension between Stark and Lannister. Contrast this with Illyrio's proposed quiet poison in the dark, like Jon Arryn, which would have created confusion and possibly delay. Chataya's creates the opposite, a televised street brawl that guarantees immediate escalation. The two scenarios are not the same dance. Moving on to the Jaqen Hghar problem. This counterargument posits that the unexplained presence of faceless man Jaqen Hghar in Varys' custody fatally complicates the theory that Varys orchestrated Jon Arryn's murder and Ned Stark's death. The sequence of events creates a chain of contradictions. Let's start with the established facts. Jaqen Hghar is a faceless man, elite, magical, and expensive assassin. He was being held in the Black Cells, a dungeon under the direct control of Varys. He is being transferred to Yorne's Night's Watch contingent under an order forged by Varys in Ned Stark's name. Varys simultaneously arranges for Ned Stark to take the Black and join this contingent. If Varys' goal was simply to eliminate Jon Arryn and then Ned Stark, hiring a faceless man is a bizarre choice. Faceless men cost a fortune. Using one to kill a sick, already doomed Ned Stark en route to the Wall is a grotesquely inefficient expense when he was already set to die from his infected leg, or could have simply been stabbed by one of the criminals. Varys is a pragmatist who favors simple, deniable tools who can later be disposed of. Using a faceless man is therefore a perplexing choice. Varys had already guaranteed Ned's death via his infected leg. If Jaqen's contract was to kill Ned, then sending Jaqen is redundant. If the contract was for someone else in the group, like Gendry, Arya, or Yoren, nothing in the text supports that, and Jaqen takes no action against them. To argue that Jaqen was placed as a contingency for Arya or another target requires Varys to have impossible levels of foresight. At the time of Jaqen's imprisonment and transfer, Arya wasn't missing, and Ned was still hand. Varys could not have known that she would be on that cart. The Baeley's conspiracy cannot elegantly explain why he would have a faceless man in his pocket at that precise moment. The introduction of Jaqen is a complication that the Baeley's conspiracy struggles to absorb without resorting to assumptions about wasteful planning that are alien to Varys' established methods. Here's my answer. While the Jaqen problem is strong, it can be reconciled within the Baeley's conspiracy by considering the nature of the faceless men and Varys' capabilities. First, as stated, Varys already knew that Ned was dead, so it's quite obvious that Jaqen was not there for Ned. He's there for someone or something else. Second, the Jaqen problem presupposes that Varys knows Jaqen is a faceless man. Although there's evidence that Varys knows and uses magic, there's no evidence that he can see through glamours, especially glamours made by a master sorcerer, like a faceless man. Third, the Jaqen problem also presupposes that Varys was the one who contracted Jaqen. He may have been placed by someone else, and Varys is simply facilitating his entry into King's Landing and the Night's Watch convoy. We see that other people in the series are terrified of the Faceless Men, and that people in Essos will accept their iron coins in the hopes that Faceless Men will remember their service and spare their lives later. It's not too wild to suggest that if Varys was approached by Jaqen with an iron coin and said, "Put me on the next cart to the wall," then Varys would oblige to stay on their good side. Fourth, as Jaqen states, Faceless Men contracts can be fulfilled years later. Assuming that Jaqen is in the cage to kill a target assumes that his contract must be imminently fulfilled, which is a baseless assumption. There are many other possibilities. Jaqen's placement could be for a target that he will eventually meet on this journey. For example, someone at the Wall or the Citadel. Or the trip could have been a diversion from his real contract, because the Faceless Man wanted to recruit Arya for something big. Ned's trip could have just been a means to an end, so it doesn't necessarily refute the Baeley's conspiracy. For all we know, he could be contracted by the Faceless Men themselves to destroy Sam's books rather than killing someone. Fifth, Varys does actually have the means to know that Arya would be on that cart, and that it would never reach the wall. He uses blood magic to see the future on the page in front of us twice, and he's using a Targaryen brazier in secret below the Red Keep. And 6, even without Varys' magic abilities, the Faceless Men have magic abilities, and may have used various spells to foresee Jaqen's path. Jaqen being in the cage might be step 1 on a magical sequence to achieve a future goal unrelated to Ned. This convoluted journey of going in the cell to go in the cage to get to Harrenhal to recruit Arya to go south to Old Town might be the only way to complete an unknown mission, like Doctor Strange says in Infinity War. Finally, the argument presupposes a contract. Not every action taken by the Faceless Men is a paid contract. They recruit without a contract. They gather intelligence without a contract. They make money and feed themselves without contracts, and they pursue their own agenda. Jaqen's mission to reach Old Town and the Citadel could be personal to the Faceless Men. His recruitment of Arya and his cage transport could be part of this larger inscrutable purpose, which Varys may or may not be aware of. While the Jaqen Hghar problem presents the most significant challenge to the thesis that Varys orchestrated both Jon Arryn and Ned Stark's death, its power as a counterargument is limited by the incomplete nature of the story. It's a mystery that transcends any single character's conspiracy. My research is the best available explanation for the books we're examining, and its biggest problem, the Jaqen problem, is a mystery for everyone. It's crucial to recognize that this burden is not unique to this thesis. Any competing theory, such as Littlefinger being the main mover of King's Landing, must also contend with the same inexplicable event. A faceless man was in the Spider's custody, bound for the wall alongside the man that everyone was trying to control. The Jaqen problem does not disprove Varys' involvement. It simply highlights that a critical piece of the puzzle, the purpose of the most dangerous assassin in the world, remains missing from the board. Ultimately, the question of what was Jaqen doing there belongs to a deeper layer of the saga, one concerning the agendas of Braavos, the Citadel, and the metaphysical conflict that hasn't fully unfolded on the page. Within the scope of King's Landing's immediate political murders, the preponderance of evidence still points to Varys. The Jaqen problem does not fully refute it, but it's a reminder that in the Game of Thrones, even the most compelling explanation operates in the shadow of a wider, still unfinished story. Finally, we arrive at the conclusion that Varys is not working in the interests of fAegon. A common reading holds that Varys' grand plan is to install fAegon as king, but this theory is founded on taking Varys' dialogue with Kevan Lannister at face value. A closer examination of the conversation, which I covered in my previous essay, and of the strategic landscape that Varys has cultivated, reveals that placing fAegon on the throne is a guaranteed recipe for war, not peace. Given that Varys is extremely intelligent, it cannot simultaneously be true that his endgame is peace, through installing fAegon, when the outcome will be war, through installing fAegon. Real or fake, the plan makes no strategic sense. To see how this works, let's go over what Varys has done. First, he saved Daenerys Targaryen. He helped Viserys and Daenerys escape King's Landing and Dragonstone, keeping them alive as beggars. Second, he cultivated Aegon. Real or fake, a claimant of some kind has been raised in secrecy to fully believe that he's Aegon Targaryen, with all of the associated legal rights and privileges and the entitled attitude. And this claimant has been given training appropriate for an heir to the throne. 3. Varys separated them. For their entire lives, these two competing branches have been kept deliberately separate from each other. 4. He maintained ignorance between them. Varys kept Viserys and Daenerys ignorant of Aegon's existence. They were never informed of even the possibility of Aegon surviving. And despite Daenerys remaining in one place for a while and rising up as a queen in her own right, she isn't informed of Aegon's existence before his invasion of Westeros already is taking place. And 5, Varys empowered both branches. Daenerys was given Eliza Farman's dragon eggs via Illyrio. Although the means of hatching them is inadvertent on Illyrio's part, we can't assume the same of Varys, who has a suspiciously deep knowledge of magic and Targaryen history. But in any case, Daenerys is also empowered by being married off to Khal Drogo and given a massive horde of Dothraki warriors, the largest in history. Varys also empowers fAegon by giving him the Golden Company and a fleet of ships to carry them. If fAegon is real, then Varys engineered the downfall of the Targaryen dynasty, orchestrated the death of most of the Targaryens, and then created a situation where the two surviving branches were alive, and then kept them separate and ignorant of each other, intentionally creating a situation where they would be mutually suspicious of each other. This sets the stage for a deadly war of succession, which makes no sense. If Aegon is fake, in other words, he's a Blackfire or maybe even a commoner, the absurdity remains. He engineered the downfall of the Targaryen dynasty, orchestrated the deaths of most of the Targaryens only to keep one branch alive, and then armed them for the purposes of invading Westeros and weakening it for fAegon's arrival. Assuming that Aegon is fake makes a bit more sense than if he's real, but it still makes no sense. Varys could have easily introduced the Pretender to Daenerys years ago, marrying them to force the fake claim into being a real one and preventing future conflict between the branches. Instead, he built them into rival power bases that are on an inevitable collision course. Varys has orchestrated the survival and empowerment of our Targaryen claimant, armed with a massive army, a horde of wealth, loyal advisors, and weapons of mass destruction. Daenerys will not accept a mummer's dragon sitting on her throne. This is a powder keg that Varys, in all of his intelligence and supernatural abilities, must have foreseen. Fostering conflict between the two claimants was a choice from Varys, not an oversight. Varys designed a situation where the guaranteed outcome is war. Furthermore, the fAegon theory assumes that Varys believes that fAegon will bring stability at all. Even without Daenerys as a consideration, the text shows that fAegon is impulsive and poorly tempered for rule. Varys, who helped raise him, would know this. Placing a volatile teenager on a contested throne, like he did once already with Joffrey, is a deliberate act of destabilization. We have every reason to believe that fAegon is going to be a poor king, and likely cause all kinds of conflict in Westeros if he gains power. Therefore, Varys' actions are absurd if his goal is a peaceful, unified realm under fAegon. Why must Varys want peace? The entire pro-fAegon theory hinges on the unsupported assumption that Varys wants a stable, peaceful realm, and that the intervening war and chaos is just a means to get there. After all, Littlefinger only wants chaos so that he can climb the ladder and take Sansa for himself, and Illyrio only wants war so that fAegon can take the throne. But we accept that other characters in the series, like Euron Greyjoy, have no end goal aside from death. Euron wants to achieve apotheosis through mass death, but that's not his end goal. Euron wants apotheosis in order to cause even more mass death, killing the entire world and ending it. If we can accept that Euron's end goal is destruction itself, why does Varys need anything more? What if chaos is the goal? Varys climbs no ladder for material gain. That much we can accept. What if his motive is not to build a better kingdom, but to unmake one? His actions perfectly fit a pattern of systemic destruction, weakening the realm through decades of false counsel, eliminating competent rulers, and now pitting the remaining leaders against each other. Perhaps he seeks revenge against the god that spoke in the flames when he was cut. Perhaps he serves a nihilistic philosophy like the Faceless Men or Euron, believing in the god of death's ultimate dominion over all mankind and wants to end the world. Or maybe he wants to bring about the Long Night. Or maybe he just enjoys destruction. We assume that people eat for sustenance, but they can also eat for pleasure. So too may Varys enjoy the deception and destruction itself. To assert that he wants anything more is an assumption. I alluded to this in my original essay, but Varys lying to Illyrio, scheming with Littlefinger behind his back, and protecting Littlefinger from Illyrio necessarily implies that Varys has a different goal than Illyrio. I did not expand on this point in my original essay beyond Varys being an agent of chaos in general because there is insufficient evidence to point to any specific end goal out of all the ones that I've listed. Regardless, fAegon is just a means to whatever ends Varys truly desires, not the end itself. Placing the young dragon on the throne is not his end goal. It's a bullet point on the script of his mummer's play.